Wired Axcess.
We'll do it live.
Wired Access.
Do it live.
Wired Access.
We'll do it live.
Wired Axcess.
Welcome to Wired Access Podcast, where I'm your host, DJ K-Dub Omaha. Man, this is episode 99 as we keep venturing on in season 3, 99. I appreciate those that have checked out any or all of the previous 98, because without you, we can't do what we do. And also, hopefully, you checked out last week's All Access Granted that dropped. Good old boy AJ Jackson out of Millard South. We were able to go out to his school, out in the weight room, and kind of get his story of this last year. But today, I am joining Tyson Terry from Omaha North, future Corn Husker, but 4-time national champion. State champion, whatever you want to call it. To me, it's a miracle feat, because wrestling's been around for over 100 years in the state. There's 14 classes, not saying there's always been 14 classes. Only 37 people have accomplished what you have done. Of course, you have the Loudersons out at Bennington that have done it, both brothers. So that was pretty cool, but you're the first heavyweight to do it. But you did it at a peak where most people would give up. And I think to your story, it's the best part of your story, the adversity of what you could have done, what could have changed, what's the thoughts after, what's the thoughts during, and obviously to get you to this point. So welcome to the show.
Yeah, I appreciate you having me on. I'm excited.
We've, of course, had his uncle on, coach over at Iowa Western, and, he talked a little bit of being able to see sports at a different eye when it is family that's going through the process, right? He was there for an ear. He was there to talk to, but, and most of the time people don't understand why. Even myself, like, I choose not to interview people that I could interview before they make those big decisions in high school. I feel like there's so much pressure already on a young athlete, then to let alone have people really question about, well, what did so-and-so school do for you? What did so-and-so school for you? And I think it's kind of like a process that is something where either you're going digging or you're wanting to share the whole story. So that's why I also, always wait till those athletes make those big decisions. So I appreciate you joining the show, but man, this past year's probably been the hardest adventure of the 4.
Yeah.
But, just leading up to this, man, you have a lot of athleticism in your family. Both your dad and your uncle were 2-time state champions.
Yep.
The multi-sport athlete in yourself, do you even remember when you started? Was it something you wanted to start? Was it something dad wanted? Was like, hey, we're just going? What do you even remember back when little Tyson Terry started getting around?
Oh yeah, I started, before I could, remember. I know with my grad party coming up, we're kind of looking back at old pictures, and we seen a couple old ones that I was, maybe 2 years old, maybe 3 years old, did a singlet already. And so it was kind of something that I just was born into. With dad, he got me right into it, since a young age, and I've just, obviously stuck with it, and it's been a fun, 15 years.
Now, I don't know about you, but my wife's soap opera was wrestling, WWE,
Okay.
and we watched it. So when my son went to wrestle his first time, he already played tackle football. So that part was there. When it came to wrestling, though, he was thinking about what his entrance song was. Did you ever remember having or hear of that talk of Tyson Terry growing up, where you're worried about that part of wrestling over anything else?
Yeah, it was definitely something I always thought about, because, for me, like growing up, I was big into, WWE and that stuff. And so I've only, got able to, have that chance a few times, but, when I've had that, it's been pretty cool, just to kind of walk out, pick your own song, get hype. And so, that's been, that's exciting.
Well, and it's what you see, right? When it
Yeah.
comes to like boxing, you see it. Terrence Crawford, champion, multi-champion, that every time it's a different song. It's kind of like, what's the theme? What's the feeling? When you came to your songs, what was kind of your thought of of what you were going to do? Kind of where did it all go to of what song you were thinking of?
Yeah, I mean, my initials are TNT, so that's just kind of a go-to for me. TNT, Thunderstruck, and then this year came out it was The Largest by Big X the Plug, and so I didn't know.
How did you find that edited version? First of all,
so I didn't know they were gonna do that one, and so coming out of the tunnel and they had that playing, I was like, oh yeah, it's ready to go.
See, and it's I'm a DJ as well, so I've been able to DJ many things for Papio South, College of St. Mary's. I've done a little bit with like state softball. About to do state soccer this year, and like people don't understand like how much emotion and feelings happen with music. What's your thoughts on music? What is like your go-to if you're going to work out, or what's kind of been your growth through that because it doesn't stay the same. Like people don't understand that. Like maybe when you were in your 14, 15, it might have been the hardcore hip hop. Then as you get older, you're like, no, the lifting is the hard rock. What's kind of been your experience with that?
No, yeah, I mean that's what growing up wrestling. I never really had headphones. Never kind of worked out with music. It was only until like middle school, I was started to put the music on, the headphones on before matches and things like that. And like youth football, you can't have headphones. Warming up. You come an hour early. So it's different. But I would say, lifting and like, just hanging out and then, wrestling matches, football games, it's a different type of music. You always have to. And, with me is, I like getting, ready to go, ready to, just getting that mindset, kind of just ready for war. And so I really like everything, kind of like old school rap, just kind of something with a good bass, just ready to get you pumped up, ready to go. And then, working out. It's kind of, old school kind of rap too. Same thing. Same with football, just, AC/DC, Rocky, things like that. Just kind of
anything to get that adrenaline going. Right?
Yeah.
You look back, of course, you were part of the Little Vikes. Little Vikes. Bad. Little Vikes. But you look at the Little Vikes going through that experience. In this day and age, you see players go everywhere, right? 1 year here, 1 year there. How important do you think it was for you and your growth to understand your loyalty to what you want to accomplish with one program or through the years, that you see other people kind of switch up and they're quick to switch if things aren't going their way?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's something that I've kind of just been bred into, with my family. I come from a, big family and, that's number one important thing, and just loyalty has kind of just been some with me. I'm a big, relationship type of guy. And so, that's what I played for Lil Vikes, growing up since third grade, whatever, until, 8th grade. And then I did play at Millard North for a year, my 8th grade year, just, it was kind of just situation that was, going on. And then obviously North, just, feeder program. But, I think for me, it's just kind of like, I think a lot of kids are, they're just, not really chasing, the right thing. They're trying to, do, the cool things, trying to look cool and, things like that. And I think for me, it's kind of just who I am as, I'm not going to change for, for somebody else. I'm just going to be who I am. And so, with me is, I've kind of just, I mean, life is tough, so you can't just quit, can't just find something else. You see some guys like they've been in 3 different colleges and it's just like, man, like you're not even, building, relationships really. I mean, you're there and just getting money or, getting whatever and bouncing. And so for me, I think, I'm a big, like I said, big relationship guy. So I think for me, like, was kind of choosing Nebraska was like, I got to look at this, in the long run too. And so that was kind of, high school wise too, figuring out where to go. It was just where I felt most comfortable, where I thought I was going to succeed the best. And, I think I see some kids, they're not having success or they're not getting offers. They're like, oh, it's, this coach's fault or, it's that. It's like, man, like maybe it's you, maybe, And so I think, for me, staying loyal is just kind of something I've always been to, true to. I see a lot of, fake people out there trying to, just, whatever, just because you're doing, big things. And so I think it's always important to, remember who, you were with, since the run.
Well, I mean, of course, you were also a part of your dad's wrestling program,
Yep,
the NE Boys.
Yep.
Wrestling with some of those guys across the metro, how does that help you as a person to understand the individuality of we can succeed at different levels at different areas?
Yep.
Or we could have went to one school and made one school super big, right? I mean, obviously, Scud has their own thing already, but some of those boys are a part of what you grew up with. How important was that to your guys' goals?
Yeah, I mean, it was always kind of something we thought about. Like, man, what if we all went to one school? That'd be crazy. But Nebraska Boyz, I mean, we really had kids from everywhere. I mean, we had kids from driving from Lincoln, and just not even around, kind of the metro area. And so it was really cool. I mean, I wrestled with, there's tons of state champs, placers. I mean, high school, everywhere. And so it was just kind of like, growing up with those guys and, all the guys that are having success now and, high school, college, even, it was just kind of, we were in there to, get better. I mean, it was just kind of, what we did in there. It was, getting better. There was a lot of banging heads in there, and it was a good environment to be in.
What do you remember about the facility? Where did it start? Where is it the last that you remember? Because I know as programs get bigger, they have to make different choices, whether it's the amount of practices you have, the amount of people that you can have. What all do you remember kind of through your time there?
Yeah. So our first year that they opened up, we were behind the bleachers at Northwest High School. And so that's where we started. We've never really had, the big, kind of big building, flashy. And so every year after that until now, we're in a building that's off 84th and J. It just, sits back in there, it's a kind of dark room.
What do you remember about that switch though, from Northwest to 84th and J? What was kind of like that? I mean, obviously you got to feel like it's a step in the right direction, right? You're like, well, now we're even more centralized, and now it's a little more consistent, right?
Yeah. I mean, it was cool because we're the new club. We kind of got our own building now, and so it was nice. I know we had the walls painted, finally with red and black, and so it was just they actually just got new mats in there last week or something. So it's
nice.
kind of just look back on that. It's really cool just to kind of, I mean, dang near grew up in that room. There's been a lot of long nights in there, long weeks. And so, just to have that, and then, just being the position that I was, with the coaches and the other kids, I mean, it was just kind of just changed, my mentality towards everything in life. And it's, I'll always be around, that wrestling program, wrestling in general. Got two younger brothers. So, we're kind of
making waves, man, 1 year at a time. You look at, of course, your experience to the Lil Vikes. What was so important to keeping that rolling for yourself? And of course, your family is from Omaha North, but why made it so special to stay where you're at?
Yeah, I mean, for me, I'm the fourth generation at North, but for Lil Vikes, I don't know if many people know this, but my great grandpa, he started it back in 1967, and so it was just a family thing. Kind of the field was memorized for him, and so being able to play on that field was meant a lot. He kind of got me into football, and he came out of retirement just to help coach, and so big football family, so that was
I think people forget that kind of stuff, like where coaches will come out the woodwork, especially for family, and just you made him feel younger every day that he got to be out with you guys. What was kind of like those memories like for you? And just like it's the part in the moment you don't think about, right? But as you're sitting here, you're like, man, like this dude was retired for a little bit. He got away. He felt good. And then all of a sudden I drug him back in. But the smile every Saturday, Sunday, because you guys probably still played and still do down at the power plant, which is a unique field in itself. It's not about flashy. It's about having something available for you guys to play on.
Yeah. I mean, it was nice, it was a lot of butt chewings, just from him. And, my dad was the coach and kind of knew my cousin was another coach. And so, they weren't scared to, weren't scared to, get after me a little bit. And so, like I said, I'm just thankful, just for him to, unretire, but come back down and coach, and then be able to play on the field. Other kids, it's Coach Bob, but to me, it was Grandpa. It was always cool to play for him, and all the success that he had, in the '90s and Lil Vikes and everything like that. And so, and then once I got into 8th grade, then he finally retired, and so it was kind of it was a nice send off, I guess, just to be able to start with him and kind of finish my youth career with him. And then sadly ended up passing away two summers ago, and so it was just kind of to look back on, and it was just really grateful just to kind of have him bring me up.
See, and I tell people, like, those are the things, those memories, and just like you said, like, because I haven't interviewed any young athlete except for one time last year. I interviewed Yano Jones,
okay, oh
his
yeah,
son,
yeah,
and him. And then I look back at it now of how important that conversation ended up being with Yano's passing. And like, those are things that you can't go back, you can't capture if it never happened. And of course, your memories on those fields up till 8th grade. What did you decide, and what changed between 8th grade and 9th grade that made you go a different route, as far as, were you going to pursue one or the other harder? What was kind of your thoughts as you were starting to transition to high school? Of course, you knew you were still going to be a dual athlete. You still had goals, but you obviously got to look at your size differently between the two.
Yeah. It was kind of still up in the air a little bit my freshman year too. Because I had a lot of success my 8th grade year, wrestling just around the country and everything. And so it was thought of, maybe we do both, and then both in college, football and wrestling. And so kind of going through freshman year, I kind of still had, the thought of just maybe I'd pick wrestling, maybe I just do football, maybe both. And so I think, going through freshman year, and then after having a good football season, started on, varsity my freshman year. And so I think that kind of just picked up the success, and then end up getting a couple offers my freshman year. And then we just got to thinking, long run, maybe what's, best success. Football obviously has, a little bit more money, just, longer run, than wrestling in general. And so I think, for me, wrestling's been a part of me, since I was a young kid, and football too. But I think football was just more of a passion kind of thing for me. And it was kind of something that I love doing. Wrestling was just, I was good at it, and I loved doing it, but it was just like, man,
it's still dog eat dog in wrestling.
Yeah.
And I'm sure those practices mean a lot to you. And of course, you said start as a freshman in high school. What do you remember about even just kind of that first week, that first game? Thoughts, like, how did you even try to prepare? I mean, because as a freshman, this is where age changes, right?
Yeah.
And the Lil Vikes were a part of the grade level feeder. But if you're a person who just plays just any age, it changes your mind, because you're now playing against some 17, 18-year-old men, young men, right?
Yeah.
What was kind of your thought that first week, and how did you maybe find your realization of what you could or couldn't do?
Yeah, it was definitely different, because it wasn't 8th grade football anymore. This is big boy football, Class A football. And so that first week, it was a week in summer, June something, I can't remember, but it was the locker room camp. So I had kind of all the OPS schools, and had Burke, Central, Papillion, Westside. And so after that first week, it was like, man, like, the speed of the game is, much different, just going from, 8th grade football to, high school. Everything's just faster. It was no room for, different steps, kind of get you out of place or anything like that. It was kind of one step thing, and then, you're out of the play or something. And so just going through that. And I think, my freshman year, we had a really good, defensive line in general, had two, the other two ended up going to Iowa Western. And so I think they really helped me a lot. Just kind of, getting it down and, seeing different things. They were seniors, so, they were veterans, obviously. And so I think, for me, my freshman year too is, that year before OPS had COVID. so they didn't play. And so I know, it was a bunch of guys just, hungry to play and ready to go. And, my freshman year, we actually started 0-6 at North. And so I was like, man, like.
Now, position-wise, was it something where you came in, you knew exactly where you're going to be, or was it something on that line where you might have had to adjust where they needed you?
Yeah, I knew that I was going to be D lineman, but then I actually played tight end my freshman year.
Okay.
Yeah. So I only went out for.
Don't hate on those big guys with hands. I piss people off all the time because I will catch everything. Just because we're on the line doesn't mean we don't want to catch.
Oh yeah.
But go ahead.
Yeah. And so I only went out for one pass that year. It was against Westside, but North's offense, tight end, back then was just kind of like another tackle out there.
Yeah.
But I played, and it was 3-4, so D tackle, DN, whatever. And so, and then I ended up knowing, as I was getting bigger, that I would have to start playing some guard. That's what I played. My sophomore year, played a little bit of center. Junior and senior year, and mostly guard. But I kind of just knew, and that's what Coach Martin. Like I said, relationship guy. I've known him since I was a young kid. I mean, his first year there was my dad's senior year. So he knew, my family, dad, uncles, cousins, everything. And so
he's been eyeing him since he was out of the womb of the future.
Oh yeah. So, just kind of talking with him and Coach O'Neill, known him, forever. And so, it was just kind of something like, yeah, I'm going to be a lineman. I mean, I always was a lineman growing up, offensive, defensive lineman. So it was kind of something that I knew was going to be.
Do you like the fact that, because it doesn't always happen, where you go to some schools like a West Side and there's so many players that they kind of put you at one position?
Yeah.
I mean, I tell everybody the story every time. Noah Fant, the only reason he left Burke from championships to Omaha South was for what? Playing opportunity.
Yep.
Was that a part of also your thought of being able to play both ways, or was it something you knew no matter where you went, that was going to be something you were going to do anyways?
Yeah. I mean, it was kind of something that, I thought about, but I knew, for me and just kind of my mentality, I knew that I was going to find a way, just to, be on the field that first year. Actually, I never really wanted to play offense. I was like, man, I just want to do defense, but, they needed me. I wanted to do whatever, I best could for the team. So I was always open to it, playing tight end freshman year, then guard to center, back to guard, it was just.
What was your favorite on the likely of the offensive line? Because obviously it wasn't your favorite, but what was your favorite of the three?
I mean, I like tight end. I wish I always mess with Coach O'Neill, till this day. Like, man, you should have put me out for some more routes, man. I mean, what's going on here?
Give me the ball a couple times.
And that's what I used to mess with him too. Like during freshman year, I'm like, I mean, one route. I mean, what is going on here? And so, I like guard, center. That's what, this year against Westside, I played center half the game, played guard half the game. And it was just kind of plug and play and let's go. I'm ready to go. We had a new O-line coach, Coach McLaughlin, last year, and I loved him. He his mentality was pretty similar. He was came in and we were ready to work every day, and so it was kind of like I said, just ready to go, help the team best I could, and let's go.
What was the change for you? And I'd like to just from the kid, like think of you as a kid, as a freshman. What was the hardest change for you from going from dad's been there as a coach to now you're in high school? How was that relationship change for you? And what was some of your thoughts even as a young athlete? Because it's probably one of the hardest things being a coach's son, no matter the sport, because everybody thinks you get everything, but they don't really understand what the get everything gets.
Yeah. I mean, it was tough just because, that's how I kind of like, being coaches, physical, tough, like demanding, let's go, and so, that's kind of just how I've always had it, growing up with everything. And so I think, the coaches at North, I think they kind of, they're well like that, they're going to get in your butt if they need to, and, different things like that. But, with him, he's always, been there for me, done everything he could. And so, like, I think, growing up and everything, it was meant for, not just winning now or not just doing these things now, but, they're going to help me in the long run. And so, growing up, those butt chewings, man, I freaking hated it. I was like, man, why am I doing this? But, I think, you see a lot of, people now that are, tough on their kids and, maybe some people disagree with that, but, for me, it was kind of like, it made me into who I was now. It kind of, was the purpose. It all kind of makes sense, everything that he was saying, just with life, wrestling, working out, the work ethic, your mentality. I think, for me, he was always, on me. And then, as I've kind of, gotten older, I've been able to, do those things on my own, kind of find that, that will, and that mentality, for myself. And, I can't, thank him enough, for that. And, he's always, been there. Just, through high school, he's always, every game he's, texting me forward, like, let's go, he's hyping me up, wrestling matches, getting me ready to go, I mean, this year at state, it was not just this year at state, but just in general, with the knee, it was kind of just, thinking of every situation, and so, I think, he just prepared me, very well for, just everything in life.
When you look at your freshman year going from football to wrestling, what was probably your hardest transition that you might not have experienced prior to that?
Yeah, I think, because I mean, my freshman year, I was like 250, 260 maybe, but it was just kind of, I guess, the strength wise, just it was different, just from middle school wrestling and then wrestling, these big guys. And then obviously the, football conditioning, into wrestling conditioning, I know that's always tough, that first month and whatever. But I knew, for me, I was blessed with a bunch of, great coaches, and so I think for me was the big thing of, you see a lot of these guys, they want to use their strength and, wrestling and stuff. And so, for me, I was kind of trained, not as a lightweight, but, kind of trained, not just as, a big heavyweight, hit big heavyweight moves. I think, that's kind of been, why I've had so much success is, I can move, kind of
stay agile,
yeah.
just like a middleweight, and still have that heavyweight mentality.
Mm-hmm.
You get to your senior year or your freshman year in wrestling. What do you remember that first year and kind of going through the process, and you're starting to see your wins pile up? Kind of what's the mentality going through Terry at a young age? Because it can very easily change, right? You can very easily let it get to you because you're like, I've seen this. Or how did you mellow yourself to go, I've been here before. Yeah, I've won before.
Yeah, and that's what I've had a lot of success, growing up, wrestling around the country. And so, it was kind of a situation, I've been here. I think my dad, he's had a, big part of that was just, kind of putting every situation out there. Like, he always talked about, he was undefeated his sophomore year. He had a kid in the state finals that he whooped up a few times. And so he kind of went in there, big headed, thought he was going to, beat the kid and ended up, losing. And so, so that's what I think, he kind of prepared me for, was just every situational. He was always there, pushing me, making sure that I'm, ready to go. I'm doing the right things. And so for me, I think it was kind of just like, it was something that I wanted. I wanted to be a 4-time state champ. So, I've seen a lot of guys growing up, they get a couple titles, and then, their senior year, you kind of see them slacking off, and, they're not doing the right things. And so then they end up, getting beat or, stuff like that. And so that was always big on me is, man, I don't just want, one title. I don't want, 2 titles. I want to be a 4-time state champ, undefeated. That was always something I always thought about, but it was like, man, that's going to
put it to paper is a whole different story. Right?
And so that would be tough. But I think for me, it was always, being humble and hungry. There's always, another level to reach.
When you look at that freshman year at state, what do you remember first about your first state go around, and what was kind of the learnings from it that helped you kind of propel you as you continue to go?
Yeah, I mean, so that was the first year they had the girls wrestling join with the boys. So I remember it was, cool experience. You always, go down there watching it. You're like, man, I can't wait to be here one day. And then, you finally are, and you're like, man, it's the big show now. Got the bright lights, and I always remember, that semis day. It was like the first time it was sold out since like the Devaney. And so I walked out there and I was like, holy cow, like this is nuts. And then Parade of Champs for the finals. It was kind of surreal. It was something that you've always watched, growing up, always wanted to be in. And then, just to be in that situation, it was just, kind of something that was kind of hyped you up a little bit. And so I think, just with that freshman year, I had a lot of, my dad was there, had a lot of coaches, they were kind of just, telling me with the nerves and everything. And Tyler Stewart, he was a 3-timer. And so he was, one of my best friends, training partners growing up, at Nebraska Boyz and, at North. And so, he was kind of, there. And so I think, with me, I've always been on the, biggest level, with youth for wrestling. And so it was kind of like a situation, I've kind of been here. And so, let's just shut these out and, it's just another match.
What about that championship match? What was your takeaway from that when it was all said and done? What was the feelings? What was the total result for you besides obviously getting the championship?
Yeah. So that, it was a tough kid that year. We wrestled 3 times. So I beat him my freshman year, beat him in double overtime, and then beat him like 4-0. And then I beat him 4-2 in the state finals freshman year. But it was just like, obviously excitement, first state title, got your family there. It was Class A, it was just exciting, and it was just then it was just another step, to the, overall goal. And so it was really, really fun experience just to kind of be there with, family was there, obviously friends and Tyler, he won his 2nd title that year too. So it was a really exciting year. I think we finished North Wrestling. I think it was top 6, I think. And so it was really just a really cool, fun, freshman year there.
What do you think was your success to mix what you know and what you're learning from the new coaching staff going to high school?
Yeah. I think, my dad was really big on, the basics. You see a lot of guys, they're trying to just hit cool moves or, do cool things out there. And so, that was just, sticking to the basics, obviously, you got to, learn new moves and things like that. But, for me going from, just youth and having my success and then, through high school and, those coaches, it was just, kind of same thing, knew them, they knew what was going on. And so I think then it was just kind of more of critiquing things, cleaning up on, small things that, that can cost you a match or, just cleaning up in general, making, everything more crisp, things like that.
That relationship that you talk about, you get them, you guys obviously, what is your next step for sophomore year? What do you mentally know you got to change for football and for wrestling? Because of course, once you win one title, that is on your back and people are looking to take you down, especially when you're undefeated.
Yeah. For football wise, it was kind of had a big year. I think got 4 or 5 offers. So, went to a ton of camps. And so I was ready to go, couldn't have, been a better first year for me. I knew, football wise, I was starting to play both sides of the ball, full games. And so, that was different. Obviously you got to, get in shape for that. And so that my sophomore year, the first football game, I tore my labrum, my shoulder, the first game. And I was just, it was like, man, like didn't want it to, be something like that. And so I kind of shut it out, went away for a little bit. So I didn't think, anything was kind of going on. And, week 5 or 6, dove for a tackle and felt it again. I'm like, man, like, so something's not right here. And so, I ended up going in and, torn labrum. We're like, man, like we can't miss wrestling here, like we can't miss football. And so, put a brace on, finished football out. It was, we got beat to Grand Island, in the first round of the playoffs, I believe, my sophomore year. And we were winning the whole game. I had a scoop and score for a touchdown on defense. I was on top of the world. And so it was kind of same thing, dove for the quarterback and I really felt it. I'm like, dude, like this is maybe something that I can't do. And so that was just kind of another thing is, the mentality, like you got to find a way to, do things, and so just able to get through that because it was tough. I mean, was able to raise her, get in different situations. I mean, it would hurt really bad.
What's kind of your family's thoughts through that part, through the first big injury? Because you go from like where you feel like you have so control.
Yep.
And now you start losing control, and you got 2 ways to go. You already know you can back out and get rest and get better.
Yep.
But you also know wrestling season's coming around.
Yeah.
What was kind of the family aspect, and how did you overcome that? Because as a guy who is all go, all gas, no breaks, it's a mentality thing.
Yeah, I think that comes from my dad. He's was tough dude, and so just thinking about it, it was like I can do this. I mean I can do. Just got to have belief. Got to anything's possible. And so just that process, it was like, well, I'm not gonna wrestle, and so it was just sitting here like, man, I want 4 state titles bad. And so obviously it sucked. But I, luckily enough that it never popped out or never anything worse happened to it. But yeah, it finished football out. And that's what that last game, I'm like, man, I don't know if I could play any other football games, just how I was feeling. So took a couple weeks off there. And then, just got right back into wrestling and kind of, I think I practiced with the brace just to, be safe and things like that, but never put it on during the match just because, I mean, come out with a big shoulder brace. I mean, guys are going to be,
they're going to be
attacking it right away. And so, and that's what, kind of had to stay quiet about it, just like my knee this year. Just because, you don't want guys, attacking it, asking you all season, like what's going on. And so,
what is the college that have been talking to you? What do they say about it, you playing with it? What do they know about it? Do they know about it at that time? Because I know, obviously, that's something as well, right? You're like, I got to be careful what they know, not in a bad way, because they obviously have a interest in you, but also your interest in them. How's that conversation? Is there conversation?
Yeah, so that's what we kind of kept it quiet. Nobody really knew until like I think Nebraska was one of like the first ones to know. Just kept it quiet because we just didn't really know. And then it was thoughts maybe because I mean I completed whole football season, went through wrestling, or like, man, do we want to get surgery? That was a thought too. And so obviously we ended up getting the surgery. And so we kind of kept it quiet. We're like, if they don't ask, then we're not going to say. But I think at the end of the day, I think Iowa, K-State, they kind of all knew, and were that didn't mean nothing to them because they knew that just because that injury, they were still gonna pursue me. And so I think that I had surgery in that February, and then that June is when I end up committing to Nebraska. So they kind of knew that whole time, and then were checking up on me during the rehab process and everything.
Was it the chatter of state that year for you for wrestling of your competitors knowing anything about it, or was it something that you were able to make it all the way through wrestling with just you and your family knowing what was really going on with Tyson Terry at that time?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think much people knew in general, just because we kept it quiet. And then for me, it was kind of just finding a way to get through this. I think that was kind of just my thing. Just through everything is you got to find a way.
What'd you change up in your game? You had to change something up, right?
Yeah. I mean, it honestly wasn't much. Just it was a lot different than the knee. And so it was kind of just maybe not because it was this shoulder, so maybe not collar tying or doing different things with this arm and kind of more here and attacking this side. And then obviously not getting put in risky situations that we don't need to be in when and things like that, and scrambles. And so like this year is completely different, but for that back then, I mean, it was just kind of finding a way to get the match done. Don't want to get in any situations that we don't want to.
You make your commitment in June. You just won your second championship. What made you decide in June that that's when you wanted to make a decision, and how did that possibly help you maybe relax a little bit, but also there's the other edge of it, right? The expectation raises.
Yeah, I think for me, It was kind of I had a feeling, because Coach Rule completely changed, where I was thinking, but just with past coach, their staff, down in Lincoln. It was kind of like an attitude where I wanted to go anywhere but here. And so, when Coach Rule kind of came in, I was kind of the same way, and then just building that relationship with him and Coach Nyan and Coach White and them, putting the emphasis on how much they want me and how much how they feel towards me. It completely changed that. For me, I think committed to Nebraska. Started getting a few more stars. There, and so it kind of motivated me more just because I wanted to prove everybody just that I am who I am. And then obviously the shoulder surgery kind of helped a little bit just because I was out all that spring, that summer, and so it was like I'm missing this, so I got to be ready to go. And then I was playing both ways on the ball, so it was just a mentality like we gotta get ready to go here.
When you say that Coach Rule changed your mentality, of course, me as a fan, me as a former high school football coach, me as someone that is obviously out in the community trying to show our community as much as it is. What was the biggest thing to you as a player, as someone that's looking for a future? What was kind of your biggest selling point for you?
I think for me is, you look where he's at. I mean, he's had success, everywhere he's been. He's been in the NFL, so he sees, what it takes or what guys need to do. And then I think just in general was bringing, Coach Knight and Coach White. I mean, those were just talking with them and picking their brain out. I mean, they were just smart, they knew the game. And then, Coach Knight, I mean, he played in the NFL, coached, for a little bit. And so, but with Coach Rule, I think, the thing I like about him is that he's a true man, he's honest, he's going to keep it real with you. And that's what I think kind of going on, the recruiting trips and everything. It was, you kind of see who's selling, who's just trying to sell the program or who's, really, really there to, do the right things. And so I think back to what you did say is, kind of shutting that down in June. I felt like I was going to go there. And I just didn't really want to, waste the time of, building more relationships with other schools that I just felt like I wasn't going to go there. And so I think, for me, it was early. I mean, it was before my junior year, before Rule even coached a game. And so I just trusted him, everything that he was saying in that relationship that we kind of built and just got to know each other. And, the things that he had planned or what he wanted to do here. And then just watching him talking, in his conferences and, press conference, whatever, things like that. It's like, man, I like this a lot. And then just hearing him talk before games, it was just really kind of all exciting, just kind of really put an emphasis on that.
When you think of that time and you think of talking with your family, what was kind of those conversations going on before you made your decision? Of course, your dad's seen many athletes get to those levels. Yep. Your uncle's had great success where he's been, and it's at a different level, right? Because of his height. Yeah. So you got to look at all those kind of things. How was that all factored into everything that kind of came together when you got the decision in June?
Yeah. I mean, we come from a big football family, big family just in general. And so, my dream school was Oregon, that just growing up, I think just with the jerseys and everything like that. And
I tell anybody, if you're not a football guy and you wouldn't ever dare just go get one big bag of so much stuff. I mean, because I even brought it up. I mean, that's how I won a thing to get on the radio is the thing that separated me when we did like this one-on-one competition. Okay. And the thing that everybody else resorted back, there's like 5 of us. Everybody else resorted back to everything that we've already talked about. I resorted back to the jerseys that Nebraska people locally will complain about.
Okay. Yep.
I said, I coached at Omaha South. When we got the black jerseys, people don't understand what those mental things do for kids in this day and age. And if you're not moving with the generation, you're just going to be left behind. Like, don't get me wrong. I love the traditional outfits. I do. But if you don't throw a little sauce in there, you're gonna be lost.
Yeah, I agree.
And like you said, Oregon, you could go there and you're getting a whole big bag, 17 different colored jerseys, 17 different. I mean, and that swagger continues onto the field. Like I understand people are like, well, did you see those jerseys Nebraska had and what happened? Yeah, we got to wear one different jersey one time. You're right. That swagger don't stick like that. Okay. That ain't the way swagger sticks. It sticks by the continuous of that swagger roll. And I think that's something that I see Coach Rule bringing in, obviously other ways. It doesn't have to be the jerseys, but you see it in the way that everything else is presented, and you're seeing it in the talk. So of course Oregon's your number one. Did you even have talks with Oregon?
So actually I went out there for a visit in a camp between freshman and sophomore year, and was able to put the jerseys on and do the little photo shoot and everything. And there was a kid on the visit, he was taking a few things, and I'm like, man, like this dude is crazy. I'm like, geez, I'm sitting here like, whoa, man. I mean, he snatched some cleats up. He was grabbing everything. I'm like, man, dude.
No names given, but I believe it. I mean,
I was like, geez. But that was kind of my dream school. But then, kind of back what we were talking about, it was just, 45 minutes down the road. Family can come see, close to home. I think, for me, it wasn't about choosing like 40 minutes down the road. I mean, other options, K-State, Iowa State. And so, around the area, but, just being able to be close to home, I think, that means a lot just for a family being able to come out and, visit or whatever.
How about other people that are making that decision? And of course, I know you are very close with a lot of the 24s. Yeah. How important is that for you guys' core? Because everybody knows Nebraska is successful when the core of Nebraska kids is successful. As soon as you lose that or go away from it, now obviously we got to get to the wins besides the 1.1 possession loss, but that's how you win or lose is you start there and then you grow and build. How important was it seeing how the 24 class came to for you guys?
Yeah, I mean, I can't say, for the 23 or 20, those other years, but definitely that, the 24 class coming in and then just some of the other guys just around. I mean, I feel like, it was kind of, those older classes, maybe they're too cool or, things like that. But I think, just especially with, the guys down there now and, the coaches and everything like that, I think it's a brotherhood down there. I think it's, everybody's really close with each other. I know, especially for me, I had some of the guys come down to state and, watch. And so for me, that means a lot, just to come out of their time, I know they're busy, and for them to come down and watch me, it kind of shows the brotherhood that, that's down there, the camaraderie that, the Coach Rule is building down there. And I mean, at the end of the day, that's who we're going to be playing with, that's who's going to be right beside you. And so I know for me that, I'd kind of do anything from, my team, my brothers, whatever.
You get through your junior year.
Yep.
The success isn't where you guys want it. It's weird because I remember coming to I think I might have hit 3 games that day because there was the 4:00 game.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
A 6:00 game or a 7:00. And then you guys were the latest because you guys were playing out at was it Millard or
I think so.
Yeah. You guys were playing out at Millard. So then I made it like made it right at the end. And I remember just like your face and just kind of what was probably the hardest thing of your junior year with everything else that's going on with this guy's for Nebraska, but people don't understand when it comes to football, it takes 22 to win. And if you don't have 22 that are all there, you got some stars, some shine, but you have some grime that's on the backside that you're like, I can't do nothing for those.
Yeah. I think, my freshman I think that year, it was just tough just because, I mean, we had, I think, prior to that, I think we only had 1 loss. It was to Elkhorn South, lost by field goal, and so I think just, losing that game, I mean, it was tough, I mean, you want to be a state champion, And I think for me, as I ended up going out of that game like the first quarter with a high ankle sprain, and it was just kind of tough to see, how that game unfolded. With everything like that, and then just to see, the senior class, just being a leader and a captain, being close to them, and how bad they wanted it, and so just kind of end the year off like that, and how bad it kind of ended. It was just a lot of emotions. It was just didn't want it to be over yet. And so
What was the adversity you think you had that year that you overcame and that you really found in yourself?
yeah, I think for me, just kind of like looking back on it, just with that year, is that, like you said, I mean, there's it's going to have to be 22 kids, and that's what senior year we didn't have the depth, that we had junior year, so whatever, and so it was, we got to have 22 guys out here, ready to go. I mean, we want to talk about winning state championships and talk about this, but we got to do the things that is going to put us in that situation. We had a good year this year. I mean, obviously, the West Side, they were tough. Beat us in the semis, but it still sucks too, just kind of not being able to finish that, and this year. But I think for me, that was kind of the biggest thing is I wanted a ring, I wanted a state championship. Obviously, that wasn't how it played out, but I think kind of just looking back on that was being able to prepare these next guys. I mean, because we were kind of young, and so you had to get those guys ready to go. Like, it's big time football now. It's not freshman football, and so I think big thing for them is just being able to do the things year round to get put in that situation.
You of course go through a couple quarterback changes these last 2 years. I know Circo from back when the junior Skyhawks, when he first came out here and rocking around. How hard is that at a school level like North, where consistency has to be there? How hard was that for the mold between the 2 years of being able to kind of get you guys knowing that, had we had one more year with Sebastian, what could happen? Nothing with Mikey, but then Mikey stepped in really well. It's just it's having to make that big change, and you're like, this is our last year, and we got to make this big change that was not looked for.
No, yeah, I think, and not saying anything bad about Sebastian. I was one of my best friends. That was tough, just because just how it went down, and him leaving, and talking about things that we're going to be doing senior year. But I think for me, I mean, he was a pocket passer. He wants to sling the ball, and kind of open that offense up, and we kept trying to do that at North, and I think we were just kind of getting away from our identity a little bit. And so I think everything happens for a reason. Obviously he went down to Florida, had a great year. He's going to UNLV now, but I think Mikey was kind of I think that first game he was getting hit a few times and getting right back up. I'm like, man, we might have a little baller here. He's ready to go. Ready to put his head down. But I think obviously him being able to run big kind of quarterback. I think he changed the offense a lot too. I think it helped us in a way just like Sebastian. And so, but I think it's tough. I think having Sebastian those 2 years, and then I mean, we had the thought senior year that maybe it could have been different. But Mikey came in, and he was open-eared. He was ready to super coachable, and kind of picked up. I mean, we got a new offense, and so not new offense, just kind of new different things, schemes, things like that.
See, and that's just it. Like, for someone that's been in the system since freshman year, you've seen it grown, but people don't, on the outside looking into football, don't understand how that game changes. They're like, it's still the same game. No, you got some coaches that adapt to who they have, and they obviously change the offense just a little bit. Then you got the ones that keep trying to push the same offense, and obviously that's why Omaha North has had so much success, is because they've always went around what they have and doing what they can do, instead of this is our scheme and this is all we know. Because I think obviously you wouldn't have had just only one loss, if you didn't play to what you could do.
And so I mean, it's fun. It was kind of looking back on it. I mean, obviously we're run first, and so I think that's kind of what North is always going to be. You kind of look back on it. Besides, I mean, Coach Martin's son, there wasn't really any, big time quarterbacks like that. It's always been, big line, good running back, and we're gonna run this thing down your face all game long. And so, I think it was just kind of meant to be a little bit there. But Mikey came in, and he was balling all year. So
How did this last year prepare you, you think, for college? How do you think it prepared you in the right way? And what's something you wish you would have got a little bit more of?
yeah, I think I think it prepared me a lot. Just to obviously, I was out for 6 weeks, so kind of just to look back on it and see it at a different angle. Um, I think for me, it's not having a high standard. I think that was kind of my thing after games is, maybe we didn't play, to our best ability or different things like that. And so I think it's just more of enjoying the process. You get a win, let's go. We got to win now on the next week. And so I think for me it was kind of like I knew standard that we needed to play at, practice at, and it was just something that maybe wasn't happening. And so I think it's more of just having fun, enjoying the process, enjoying that you're being there because you never know when it's your last senior year game. And so I think next year it's just being able to have fun and just play loose.
You got a knee injury. What's kind of your first thoughts when that went down? What was the thing that you were probably most afraid of, and what was the thing that maybe someone might have been able to calm for you?
Yeah, for me, the first thing I thought about was state wrestling. It was like 4-time state champ. Like that was the
So say that again. This is someone that's committed to football, Nebraska, and is already going back for the wrestling.
Yeah.
And like, I just don't think people understand that mentality that you have to have that understanding of, I've set such a high goal, and I could lose it in a minute.
Yeah, and that's what I think I just set myself to a high standard, and I think that I just don't come with a lot of joy sometimes, just do different things like that. But yeah, I mean, that was the first thing I thought about walking off, that field. I was thinking like, man, like, because I mean, I know my body. I've had 2 shoulder surgeries now, both shoulders, and I've kind of my freshman year I had a torn my meniscus, but never got surgery. And so I kind of know my body, and I knew like something was wrong. And so I just 4-time state champ in wrestling was the first thing that came to mind. And then it was, man, like this is my senior year, football, like, maybe, had a chance, to, made it to semis, and so it was just, everything was kind of unfolding like how I didn't want to, but, that everything happens for a reason. And so I think, obviously my parents were, trying to calm me down, don't not think about that, but, it's something that I'm just going to think about, and so, trainers were like, man, everything looks good, this and that. I'm just sitting here like, man, like this could not be just good. Like there's something wrong here. Like
something major.
Yeah, I'm like, okay. So, we shut
You're
it.
like, I'm not the guy who cries wolf.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't go out of it, and so I'm like, okay, but I don't think there's, this is just good. And then ended up, I had my OV that weekend, which sucked because I was, limping around, and they were like, hey, what's going on? I'm like, I just bumped my knee a little bit, and so ended up getting checked out by their doctors. They said ACL, and it was like it was over, the kind of, it just hurt bad just because obviously at that moment you're like ACL torn, like definitely not wrestling. And so
I can tell you, when I heard that you were in the wrestling again, from the outside looking in, as someone who doesn't have a close relationship with you, as we've obviously gotten to talk a little bit better, it's gotten better. But my thoughts of you wrestling was not on board with Nebraska scholarship and Nebraska athlete here, to be honest, from the outside. So you're getting to that point of where, man, you got to make a decision.
Yeah. And I mean, at first it was, we're graduating early. I mean, that's what I took, a couple of online classes at North just to, get those extra credits to graduate early, because that was the overall plan. And so, for me, it was kind of like, I mean, I went through 3 or 4 different doctors just to kind of, get their perspective on it and what they think. And only, one doctor, he was, open to, seeing this thing out and going through PT, and was fortunate enough is now he's going to be, working with the football team down in Lincoln. And so he had a tie originally just with Lincoln and their doctors. And so I felt comfortable with that. And then just going through PT and that, I mean, that was tough just because it was, something that I've never kind of had. I mean, torn ACL, it was tough. The PT was tough. And then just getting back on the mat, it was a lot of, it was just really stressful. I mean, it was constantly on my mind. I mean, like, is this thing gonna,
this could end more
Yeah,
than just
I
my
mean,
wrestling.
yeah,
It could end everything.
Yep. And so, that was a big thought too, is, you got your cartilage in there, you got other ligaments, you got to think in the long run. And so, Coach Knighton, he wanted me to get the surgery right away and not wrestle. And that's what, at the end of the day, it was my decision. So, it was a long decision. Talked with, Coach Martin, family, Coach Rule. And so, with Coach Rule, he just said that, he's behind me if I want to wrestle. But he said that if anything goes wrong, it blows out, something happens, starts to, hurt something, and we're just shutting it down and getting surgery. And, I was able to, finally accept that. It was just kind of, all right, now I got the green light, I can wrestle, and so just getting back on the mat, it was weird because, obviously you're not the same, can't, push off, can't, bend, do the same things. And so it was kind of, wrestling like a different style, but it was wrestling like, if I'm going to shoot, I'm going to take you down, and so I'm not just playing around out here.
Well, I got to watch you through some of it. You get to that championship match. Obviously, you had a scare right before where you almost lost. How did that free up your mind for the championship match, and what was kind of your final thoughts on it?
Yeah, I knew that kid. He wrestled at Nebraska Boyz, growing up for a little bit, and so, I knew that it was going to be, a tough match. Obviously, any match can go, however, but just going through that match, I knew, a lot of people asked me like, "Oh, was I scared? Was I nervous?" And I was like, "No, I wasn't. I knew that, I wanted it more. I wanted to be a 4-time state champ more. And for me, I think, I don't think he wrestles. He the way he wrestles anybody else is not the same. As he wrestled me. He had a good game plan. He tried to keep the match close. Best he could, and he did. And I was able to, obviously come away with the win there. So that felt good. But for me, like I said, like holding a high standard, like after the match, it was just kind of, I was more angry. Like, man, I just want to double overtime. Like I'm better than that, And so I think, kind of what I realized is I got to enjoy these kind of small things just because, I have one more match left, my wrestling career. And so I think with that, it kind of, sparked a little bit of fire, some energy just for, the finals match the next day, but also just being able to enjoy that, being my last, be in the state finals, and so, obviously, dealing with the knee and everything, I was just fortunate enough to, even be there.
You win your fourth one. What's the relief? What's the thoughts? And where are we at today? And what's the future? We'll get you out of here on that part. What's kind of your preparation for Nebraska?
Yeah. So, when I won that, it was like a weight off my shoulders. It was kind of something that was just really stressing me out every day. Kind of always thought about like, oh man, I got, am I making it worse? It's not hurting, but I don't know if I'm making it worse. And so it was just a big relief. I didn't have to deal with it anymore. I can kind of just move on, get the surgery, get everything through that. And so now I'm 4 weeks. I'll be 4 weeks tomorrow. Doctor said everything looked good. Couldn't have been better. So I'm just, fortunate enough for that I didn't, mess anything else up. And so, that's what, going through this now is I don't regret it at all. And so, it's kind of been a fun ride, but, wish this can maybe go a little faster, but
when are you going to be, or when did they expect you to be ready for down there?
Yeah. I think October kind of is when I'm going to be projected, I guess, cleared, I guess. But I plan on, redshirting down there and just, getting back healthy, doing the things I need to do for this.
It's a whole different mindset. And I appreciate Terry, I appreciate your story, just being able to go through the experience of like so many thoughts of ups and downs, but being able to know that the end goal is the end goal. And now you get to relinquish and be able to take in everything you can this year, get healthy the right way. I mean, because everybody does try to speed back, but you're in right hands.
Yep.
You got some great leadership ahead of you that have obviously had nothing but best interest for you, but also allowing you to make adult decisions at such a young age. Well, man, congratulations to 4 years of a championship. There's very few, 37 of them to be in fact, and the first heavyweight, but also to be a future Husker and show that Nebraska is coming back with the class of 2025, 2024, and they're looking to change the projection from here on out. Even though you won't see them this year, just be ready. Oh, yeah. And I hope if you listen to him, he wants it more than you do any of his opponents. You look at offense or defense?
Defense.
Defense for sure. Well, once again, this is a Wired Access podcast. We appreciate your support. Like, follow. Remember, if you're a parent or an athlete that goes through some of the things that these guys and gals do that we interview, that's why we share their story, because maybe one moment in your life, you're going through something hard and you're going to go, why or how do I get past this? Listen in. They're out there. They're willing to support and help. Once again, we'll see you next time.